everyone, and welcome to today's science video. In this video, we will be learning about symbiotic relationships and answering the questions, what is a symbiotic relationship? How do animals interact in both helpful and harmful ways? As well as what are the different types of symbiotic relationships. Symbiosis describes close interactions between two or more different species. So what that means is when you have two different animals who are close together in proximity, so they're living together all the time, interacting with one another all the time, they are in a symbiotic relationship. But not all symbiotic relationships are the same, but we'll get to that in a moment. Another way to look at symbiotic relationships is to look at what the word means itself. So you have two parts of this word. You have sim and you have bios. So the part of the word sim, it comes from Greek prefixes, and so sim means together, and bios means life. So we're looking at life together. So like I said, there are three types of symbiotic relationships. The first being mutualism. So in mutualism, you have both species benefiting from the interaction. So species number one is benefiting and species number two also benefiting. A perfect example of mutualism is a bee and a flower. So how do both species benefit from this interaction? So species number one, the bee, is benefiting because as the bee flies around from flower to flower, it collects nectar. And this is the bee's main food source. So it is benefiting because it is getting food from this interaction. But how does the flower benefit? Well, as the bee flies from flower to flower, it's picking up pollen from one flower and bringing it to the next, causing that flower to be pollinated. And when a flower is pollinated, it can reproduce, making more flowers, meaning that flower species is going to reproduce and keep living on. And so that flower species is also benefiting. So because species one, the bee, is benefiting, and species two, the flower, is also benefiting, we have a case of mutualism. The next type of symbiotic relationship is parasitism. So this is when an organism of one species benefits while the organism of a different species is harmed, but not typically killed. So you have species one benefiting and species two being harmed. The species which is being harmed from this relationship is typically called a host. A great example of parasitism is the relationship between a tick and a dog. So the tick, acting as organism one in this interaction, benefits by feeding off the blood of the host, which in this case is organism two, the dog. The blood acts as a source of nutrients for the tick, and that is why it is benefiting. Whereas the dog, organism two, is harmed by the loss of blood and can sometimes also catch diseases such as Lyme disease from organism one. So it's being harmed in this situation. So when we have organism one benefiting, like the tick, and organism two being harmed, like the dog, we have a case of parasitism. The final type of symbiotic relationship is called commensalism. Commensalism is when an organism of one species benefits from the interaction, while the organism of a different species is not significantly affected. So they're not helped, and they're also not harmed from the interaction. A great example of commensalism is between cattle egrets and cattle. So an egret's main source of food is insects which live in the fields which cows graze. So when the cows are walking through the fields, this causes the insects to move around and fly up and away from where they were hiding within the grass, making it easier for the egrets to catch their meal. So the egret benefits from the cow moving about because they're able to catch their food. The cow, on the other hand, is unaffected by the egrets. They are still just walking about through the field, not helped by the egret's presence, but also not harmed by them being there either. So organism one, the cattle egret, is helped because they get their food a lot more easier. And organism two, the cattle, is not helped and also not harmed by the situation. So that is why this is an example of commensalism. Now that you have all learned about what a symbiotic relationship is, as well as the three different types of symbiotic relationships, we're going to put you all to the test. So I'm going to describe three different animal relationships. one of each of the types of symbiotic relationships. And I want you to follow along and see if you can figure out which relationship is which type of symbiosis. So first, we have a spider built its web on a tree in order to catch prey. Next, a dog lives in a house with a human. And lastly, a leech attaches to a fish in a lake. All right, so let's go through the answers. So if you said that the first relationship between a spider and a tree was commensalism, then you would be right. This relationship is commensalism because organism 1, the spider, is benefiting because it is able to build a trap and get more food by building its web, but organism 2, the tree, is unaffected by the relationship because having a web on its bark really doesn't make a difference for the tree at all. So that makes it a commensalism example. Example number 2, with a dog living in a house with a human, that is an example of mutualism. Dogs, acting as organism 1, receive shelter and food from the human. Organism 2, being the human, receives protection and companionship from the dog. So organism 1, the dog is benefiting, and organism 2, the human, is also benefiting. So that makes this a mutualism example. That leaves example number 3, a leech attaching to a fish in a lake, as an example of parasitism. And that's because the leech, organism 1, is going to feed off of the fish, making it benefit, while the fish is being harmed by this situation. So organism 1, the leech is benefiting, while organism 2, the fish is being harmed. So benefit and harm, that makes it parasitism. That's all for today's video, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Just to review everything we learned, so if you've stuck with us, now you can define what a symbiotic relationship is. You know the difference between mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism, and you can also identify a relationship as being a symbiotic relationship. So good job. I'm proud of all of you. Keep up the good work.